Hey, you're watching Armored Brush Minis. Welcome to today's video. This time, we'll be going into how I based my units for Warmaster Revolution. It may seem fairly straightforward, but I get asked how I approach this a lot, and it can be a bit tricky. At this scale, it's easy to get a range of different effects with minimal effort, so let's get started. Start off, I'll be basing a unit of Dwarf Warriors. This is by far the most common basing layout you'll see. Two strips arranged either facing the long edge for infantry or facing the short edge for cavalry. I like to use superglue and activator to attach the strips to the base. I also like to use flat bases to reduce the height of the base overall. If your bases have recessed spots for your strips, this is still relevant for you, just your spacing will be different. Once the front strip is glued down, apply the texture paint to the back side of the front strip. I'm using AK Interactive Terrain's Dark Earth here, but I'll show you a few different ones later on. Try to push the texture down in between the models and onto the space between their feet. Make sure to leave a bit of a buildup in between the top of the base and the side of the strip. Next, put the texture on the back strip's front edge, once again getting in between the models. Apply glue and place the strip onto the base. Then gently push the strip forward until the buildup of material in between the strips squeezes up in between them a little bit. This will blend the two strips together so that none of the base in between the strips are visible. With the hard to reach parts out of the way, continue to cover the base and seam between the base and strip with texture. This part is where it gets easy. Just be careful not to get texture too far up onto the model's legs. Next, I add some contrast to the texture with a dry brush. This one is Gorthor Brown from Citadel, but choose one that's relevant for whatever you're doing. Then, paint the base rim whatever color you like. I always use a classic black rim for my armies. Be sure to remove any stray texture from the rim for a clean finish. This may take a couple coats, but it really helps with the final look if the color is solid. Finally, I like to add some sort of tuft or secondary texture. For these guys, I'm using Gamer Grass tiny light green 2mm tufts. I just use tweezers to grab a tuft and dab it in a bit of superglue. Try to find a place that needs some interest and stick it down. Don't be afraid to put tufts in between the strips as well. With a bit of practice, they'll sit nicely down there, and it blends the unit in as a whole. This base is pretty easy to do, and it's a convincing muddy battleground effect that I find contrasts all the metal of a dwarf army very well. With this style wrapped up, let's try a few more options. This is going to be a Grassy Plains base. Using Vallejo earth texture brown earth here, try to get some different texture variations. Once that's dry, I use white PVA glue and cover the base with it. Then, sprinkling some 2mm static grass and tapping off the excess, we'll set that aside to dry. Once again, make sure to clean off the rim of the base before painting it. Having little hairs stuck all over the rim is pretty gross. And this is the finished look. It doesn't really matter what the texture's color is, since the static grass will cover up most of it. But the texture helps to add some variation to how the grass dries, as well as blending the strips into the base more easily. Once again, we're not doing rocket science here, but it really helps to blend the units into the world around them when you put a little bit of something onto the base other than texture. Next up, we've got my Dead Earth theme. The texture here is Vallejo Diorama FX Dark Earth. Give that a chance to dry, then stick a couple of dead grass tufts on. This one is a 4mm tuft, which adds a cool height to the base, making it look like big dead brush or bushes. You can see how the height difference between the models and the tufts adds some cool variation to the bases. They give a totally different look than the more scaled down grass that you see on the dwarves from the beginning of the video. The last base we'll try today is a Highlands Snow theme. The texture here is Astrogranite debris from Citadel. After that dries, I use more of the 2mm light green grass tufts. Following that up with Valhallan Blizzard from Citadel as the snow, I add little piles and feather it out to make it look like it's melting out a bit. This style of basing adds an extra step, but it really adds a lot of contrast. The different materials have some cool texture, while the colors make it pretty striking at the table. It's really another simple technique, but one that I think is worth the effort. I hope this tutorial helps you get through basing your Warmaster models. The strip style layout of Warmaster can be tricky when you first start out, but using the methods I showed you today have been the easiest way in my experience. Basing is a great way to ground your army in a landscape, and it's super satisfying last step to painting a unit. As always, thanks for watching. This video has also been a bit of a sneak peek into the next unit for our dwarf army, so stay tuned for that. If you learned something and want to see more painting tutorials for different game systems, battle reports, as well as more units in this army series, feel free to subscribe and check me out on Instagram at Armored Brush Minis. Please leave any feedback or requests in the comments, and I'll catch you in our next video.